Shoot 'em up games, also known as shmups, are one of the oldest genres of video games in the history of the medium, dating all the way back to 1962 with the game Space War. But the ones that everyone probably knows the most of are Asteroids and Space Invaders. It wouldn't be too long until the genre became extremely popular during the golden age of arcade games, where games such as Galaxian, Tempest, Xevious, Defender and many others were the centre point of this genre. And this went on throughout the 1980s and eventually ended at the turn of the decade. By then, the genre had evolved and we had begun seeing more types of shoot 'em ups emerging and becoming subgenres in their own right, such as run and gun shooters and bullet hell shooters such as Contra and Ikaruga. By that time, the shoot 'em up became somewhat of a niche genre, and the games became less and less frequent. The earliest memory I have playing these kind of games was Defender 2 on the Atari 2600. The aforementioned run and gun shooter became popular around the time a game called Commando was released. Known in Japan as Senjo no Ukami, which translates to Wolf of the Battlefield. This game was a vertically scrolling run and gun shoot 'em up that put you in control of a lone soldier tasked with defeating hundreds of enemies as you make your way to the end of the stage. It was released in the arcades in 1985 and was eventually released on home consoles and computers, including the Nintendo Entertainment System and Commodore 64. A sequel was released in the arcades in 1990, and in the West it was known as Mercs, whilst in Japan it retained its original name, ultimately known as Wolf of the Battlefield 2. It was developed and published by Capcom for the arcades, and in 1991 the game was handed over to Sega to develop and publish ports for the Mega Drive and Master System. My introduction to these games, and in turn the run and gun genre in general, was the Sega Mega Drive port of Mercs. It has two main modes to choose from, arcade mode and original mode. In the arcade mode, the plot is very simple. The president has been kidnapped by rebels and your job is to rescue the president. Like, we haven't seen that before in video games to come, but whatever. It's an arcade game, just shoot what you see for 6 levels. Gameplay wise, it's also pretty much the same, in which you take control of a single soldier, tasked with defeating a number of enemies from one stage to the next. You can move in 8 directions and have 2 main methods of attacks. Your normal attack, which is shooting whatever gun you have in your possession, and Mega Crush attack, which acts as a smart bomb that annihilates all enemies on screen. This Mega Crush attack is finite, but more can be obtained within the stages themselves. There are also a variety of different weapons that can be picked up. These include the default assault rifle, a shotgun, a grenade launcher and a flamethrower. Each weapon can be upgraded if a player picks up a power-up icon on the battlefield, increasing range and spread depending on what weapon you have. At the end of each stage you will come into contact with a boss. Each boss is a variant of vehicle, which includes a Harrier jet, a tank and even a Chinook helicopter. The enemies vary from ground troops to marines to cannoneers to turrets and artillery, and also APCs and trucks which carry ground troops, and there are also tanks to shoot as well. The other game mode exclusive to the home port was Original Mode. It's a little more complex than the standard arcade mode in that it has a very different story and brand new stages as well, but also introduces a few different features. You can collect medals from enemies as you play, and these can be spent at a hideout, which is unique to Original Mode and when entered allows you to upgrade your abilities such as health, different power-ups, as well as the ability to change your character. Each character carries a unique weapon. I actually thought that the weapon names was the names of each character, but I believe it's simply just the name of the weapon. I don't think these guys have names at all, but the names of the weapons are rifle, burner, launcher, laser and homing. The shotgun does not make its way into this mode. I do not know why, but the laser rifle and homing missile launcher were a decent replacement. Each soldier can be upgraded and leveled up separately. The assault, flamethrower and launcher class can be upgraded 10 times, whereas the laser rifle can be upgraded 4 times and the homing missile can be upgraded 3 times. These upgrades give the same effect to the power-up icons in the arcade mode and are also permanent. Other permanent upgrades include a life bar increase and speed, which can be upgraded to a number of levels per character. There is also a bulletproof vest which reduces damage taken, and a gas mask which reduces damage taken from a gas rocket, which is an enemy weapon unique to the original mode. There are other items such as an elixir which can revive a dead soldier, and a top secret document which will uncover game tips for you. Personally, I never used the top secret documents. They did nothing to me as a child growing up, so I didn't get any use out of them at all. There are also the usual upgrades that you would have found on the field during arcade mode, and they are the health bar and smart bomb increases. One huge thing about Original Mode is that you can finish each level at your own pace, which gives you time to strategize as you progress. It's also much harder than the arcade mode in that once you die, the soldier is dead for good unless you buy an elixir, which is not cheap and can only be found in hideouts, and those can only be entered one time. And if all of your soldiers die, it's game over. Once you complete a level, your health bar carries over to the next level. There is no restoration of health and you have to manage that on your own. Playing through arcade mode and then jumping into original mode can be a little jarring at first, but you learn to get used to it, especially if you're already good at the game, which I am certainly not. I have never beaten the original mode before. I think I may have gotten to the second to last level, I cannot fully recall, but I have never seen the end credits roll. I would have either turned off the console or I gave up. And that's one of the small gripes I have about this mode. The cartridge had no battery, so there was no save feature implemented into it. Nowadays it kind of astonishes me even more as I keep thinking about it, since it does have a micro RPG upgrading mechanic, and you would have went through all of that hassle upgrading all of your soldiers only to have it swiped away completely if you got a game over screen or turned the console off. With the likes of emulators and whatnot, this would be no issue with save states and the sort. But I don't play emulators because it feels weird to me. I'll get into that in a future video if I have time. So I had to deal with this the hard way, the real way. Other gripes don't really exist for me. I generally thought that this game was a solid shooter, and I still to this day find a lot of enjoyment out of it. In fact, no, scratch that. There is one more thing that annoyed me. In 2016, I bought the Capcom Generations Collection Volume 4 for the PS1, and it comprised of 3 games: Commando, Gunsmoke, and Mercs. These are all direct ports of the arcade versions. And when I played Mercs, I noticed one thing. Mercs in the arcade had multiplayer. Up to 3 players can play this game. I had absolutely no idea that the original arcade port of Mercs was playable with up to 3 people. I wish I knew this when I had a PS1 growing up, as I would have loved to have played this with friends. Alas, I have it now, and lo and behold, I have nobody to play it with. My girlfriend doesn't even like these kind of games, so I have no hope of getting her to play these with me. Oh well. In closing, I think Mercs was, and still is, an outrageously fun shooter for the Mega Drive, and I doubt I have enjoyed any game like it since. There was a follow-up that was released 16 years later, and it was called Wolf of the Battlefield Commando 3. Wait a minute. Okay, now that's just fucking confusing. The first game was called Wolf of the Battlefield in Japan, and Commando in the West. The second game was called Wolf of the Battlefield 2 in Japan, and Mercs in the West. The third game was called Wolf of the Battlefield Commando 3. Does that mean that Mercs should really have been called Commando 2? Now that I think about it, I think I know why Mercs was called Mercs and not Commando 2. There was another game by Capcom entitled Bionic Commando, and it was advertised in the West as a sequel to Commando, with the main protagonist of both games having the same name, Super Joe. Name and character aside, Bionic Commando plays nothing like the original Commando and is more of a platformer than anything, with the ability to swing to different platforms using your arm. I personally see Mercs as the true sequel to Commando. If Capcom calls it Wolf of the Battlefield 2 in Japan, then that's what it is to me too. But I digress. Commando 3 maintained much of the same elements as the previous games and allowed for up to 3 players to play cooperatively, either locally or through online. It was received fairly well, a mixed bag essentially. It was okay, but it wasn't fantastic. I actually enjoyed it when it came out, and I was actually able to play with 2 other people this time, so I got that fix I wanted. Since then, Capcom has not announced or released a 4th installment. To be honest, I don't think there ever will be. Shoot-em-ups are not as popular as they once were, and there are a few of them being developed nowadays. Games like Commando and Mercs may never be made again unless it's a passion project being funded on Kickstarter. I'm not trying to be funny, that is truly how I believe most resurgences of old games happen. Look at games like Shovel Knight and Wasteland 2. Those games would not have happened if it wasn't for Kickstarter. Shovel Knight was developed by a team of people that grew up with NES games, and that's where its inspiration derives from. Wasteland was directed by Brian Fargo, who came back and made a sequel to Wasteland 1, but kept a style that seemed fairly similar to that of the original Fallout and Fallout 2, a series that was a spiritual successor to the original Wasteland. So in a way, Wasteland 2 is a spiritual successor to a spiritual successor. Does that make sense? I have no idea. My point is, these were games that no major publisher would have made, and if it wasn't for Kickstarter and crowdfunding, we would not have them. And if Commando 4 was to ever surface, I can only imagine it being through that system, unless Capcom just outright announces it, but that's a very ambitious wish. But once again, I digress. I'm going off on one of my tangents again. If you want a definitive way to play Mercs, it all depends on what it is you want. If it's for the arcade, then obviously the arcade ports are what you should go for, on the PlayStation 1 at least. But the Mega Drive version is fantastic in its own right, and very playable today. With that said, that's this retrospective review done and dusted. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you didn't enjoy the video, then give it a thumbs down. Maybe give me some feedback and I can improve on the next video. Until then, this has been Gamerboy talking to you on GB Gaming, where video games come first. If you are interested in seeing more, then maybe hit subscribe and enable notifications if you wish, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.